Tonight on Primetime Politics, far from over.
I'm asking you to vote with me.
We cannot afford a fourth Liberal turn.
You can't let Mark Carney have all the power, because when Liberals have all the power, they ignore people.
New polling numbers from Abacus data show Liberal support softening, and the ground game in Quebec could have a profound impact on the final result. Coming up, David Coletto from Abacus data will tell us more about his latest poll. Also, Elizabeth May, the Green Party co-leader, will talk about their ground game and why she believes the Greens deserve Canadian votes. Plus, we'll speak to the woman who's been called the Oracle of Alberta, pollster Janet Brown. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, with his 45th general election campaign approaching its end, it is clear the Liberal leader has, and for now at least, continues to be the front runner. But his challengers, well, they continue to make the case against Mark Carney.
Mark Carney will continue with every single policy he inherits from Justin Trudeau. He might look different, he might use more different buzzwords, but it is exactly the same Liberal agenda. We cannot afford a fourth Liberal turn.
You know, Mark Carney's asking for a majority. The Liberals are asking for a majority because they don't want to have to listen to folks who are going to fight back and say, hey, wait a second, don't let corporate landlords rip off people. They don't want us to be there to say, hey, wait a second, corporate grocery stores are ripping off consumers. Let's stop that. They don't want us there to fight back against his cuts. He wants to have unfettered power to be able to cut health care, to cut the services you need. He's asking for a majority. Don't give him a majority. You have the power to stop that.
As for the Liberal leader, this is what we heard from Mark Carney earlier today in Victoria.
I'm asking you to vote with me for positive reasons, regardless of which party you voted for and supported in the past. Because this is the time for serious leadership of a united country. We need to come together so we can fight President Trump together. Thirdly,
but how likely is a Liberal win? Well, new numbers from Abacus data suggest while that party does have a slight advantage, the race remains competitive, especially for Conservatives. Well, with more on his numbers, we're now joined by David Coletto, the founder and the CEO of Abacus Data. David, good to see you.
Lovely to see you, Michael.
Listen, I want to begin with your top line numbers here, because currently you have Liberals at 40%, Conservatives at 37%, the NDP 11%, the Bloc Québécois at 7%. The margin of error, I believe, is what, 2.3%? So does that mean that the Liberals and Conservatives are essentially in a statistical tie?
Well, that's one way to see it. An alternative version is the Liberals are ahead by a wider margin, right? So that margin of error extends both ways. But yeah, I think there, you can argue that depending on turnout, depending on a whole bunch of factors, that this race could be closer than what the polls suggest. But there's just as likely a scenario where it's the alternative, where the Liberals are actually farther ahead. So more likely outcome is it's about a 3-point lead right now.
A 3-point lead, as you say, and you also were writing about today saying that this is not over yet, although there seems to be a bigger spread when you talk about those who are certain to vote. We have a board here for people at home. Can you walk us through those numbers?
Yeah, so because about a quarter of eligible voters have already voted, when you take them and you ask them how they voted, and then you take those who say, I am certainly going to vote next Monday, the Liberals actually open up a slightly larger lead. They're ahead by 5 points. We have them 42% for the Liberals and 37% for the Conservatives, which suggests that two things. One is the Liberals probably did a little bit better over the weekend in terms of advanced polls. And among those remaining who say they're going to still vote, the Liberals also have slightly more motivated base. So that's been one of the interesting features of this election, is that we typically in past elections have seen Conservatives being the most motivated. They often overperform their polls, but in this case, the evidence that I'm seeing in our polling suggests that they're about equal, but the Liberals actually might have a slight turnout advantage. I think in part because they're doing quite well among older voters who we know are more likely to vote in most elections.
Yeah, more likely to vote, as you say. But, regionally, I'm wondering what you're seeing there, because it's been interesting to watch how close or not close the parties have been in key regions like Quebec, Ontario, British Columbia. What story are they telling you right now?
So we see a similar story we've seen for the last few weeks, but in British Columbia, we've got the Liberals now clearly in the lead. I think that suggests why Mark Carney is out there today on offense, trying to pick up some seats on Vancouver Island and other parts of the province. We've got the Liberals slightly ahead in Ontario. They're ahead by 5 among all committed voters, up by 8 among that most certain group that we talked about earlier. But I think an interesting story might be emerging in Quebec, where we have the Liberals now just ahead by 3 over the Bloc. The Conservatives are at 26, the Bloc at 30, the Liberals at 33, which is a tightening there. Now, I'm not ready to call it and say this is a much tighter race in Quebec. Sample sizes are smaller, but there's other indicators from other pollsters that maybe something might be happening in Quebec, and I think Quebec is kind of a critical place for the Liberals if they're going to want to win a majority out of all of this, because of how many more seats seem to be in play there than would have otherwise been in normal circumstances.
Yeah, interesting, as you say, because it could determine majority. It also could determine if, for example, the Bloc Québécois get enough seats. Do they actually hold the balance of power in the next parliament? So it's an interesting picture that we're watching emerge in Quebec in these last few days. Where do leader impressions fit into this final stretch, David?
Well, really interestingly, it's likely that Mark Carney is going to end this campaign as the only leader with a net favorable impression. So more people have a positive view of him than a negative one. And despite a little bump last week, we still see that, his favorables are really good. He's got a plus 13, which you have to go back to when Justin Trudeau won in 2015 to find another leader that had that kind of goodwill. And that's a big part of the Liberal success, is that they have the most popular leader. His numbers have not really changed all that much. In fact, they've slightly improved over the course of the campaign, and that's giving them strength. Now, on the flip side, Mr. Poilievre, is not deeply disliked. His negatives are up slightly from before the debates and the long weekend, but he still finds about 4 in 10 Canadians who say they have a positive view of Mr. Poilievre. So you really have a unique feature of this campaign, is that both of the main leaders, those running to be prime minister for the most part, are genuinely well liked by the people who are going to vote for them. And I think that's a reason why that Conservative vote has been pretty resistant to change. It hasn't gone up much beyond 40, but it hasn't dropped far either. And I think it's in part because, while not all Canadians like Mr. Poilievre, those that are going to vote Conservative really do.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this is in different times where the Conservatives currently sit, and with the popularity of Poilievre where it is, that would arguably be enough to actually get Conservatives a majority government, but these are not regular times, as we've been noting. So when you walk through this, you talk about a positive impression for Carney, slightly more motivated Liberal voters than any other political party voters, a slight lead when you look at the actual top line numbers. So what does that say to you about these final days of the campaign? Is there still room for massive movement, or is the advantage still with the Liberals at this point, David?
I think the window is closing pretty quickly. I mean, we've asked voters, have you made up your mind, or are you still open to changing it? And about 1 in 4 Canadians overall say they're still open-minded, but I also wonder how many of them are actually going to vote. So we know that about 1 in 4 eligible voters already cast a ballot, so their support, wherever it went, is locked in. And that leaves a much smaller group of likely voters who are still out there. And I don't yet see any evidence that the things that have to change for the Conservatives to be in a position to win this are changing, and they're running out of time. And so unless we see a spike in those who want to change in government, unless we see Mark Carney's favorables drop rapidly over the next few days, I'm still pretty confident that that the Liberals are the favorites to win this election, unless those things materialize as I talked about.
Mm-hmm. So the big question almost is whether it's going to be a Liberal minority or majority at this point.
Feels that way, yeah, it does, and I think we're close to the edge on how likely either of those outcomes are, but that will be where the ground game really comes in. Is the Liberal game strong? Are they going to be able to pull their votes? Same for the Conservatives, and can the NDP maybe surprise us by doing what Jagmeet Singh has said all along, is that despite very low numbers nationally, can those incumbent NDP MPs hold on? These are all the questions we're going to watch on Monday night, because I think the polls aren't going to give us much insight into those things.
Okay, David, always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
My pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
Well, there are only a few days left into this campaign, and to check in on how things are going for the Green Party, we're now joined by co-leader Elizabeth May. Ms. May, thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you for wanting to chat, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Well, always happy to speak with you. But listen, I need to start out with the state of this campaign for your party, because when you look at the polls, they're not being very enthusiastic about the Greens' chances right now. Even in your own riding, they're saying it's a potential toss-up. Has this campaign been a failure for the Greens?
Not at all. We're going to elect more Greens than we ever have before. Look, national poll numbers never reflect the strength that we have in local ridings. So yes, it's been a blow, the unfair decision of the Debates Commission to change the rules and exclude us doesn't help. But I've never been in an election campaign where polls are mounting that suggest in a horse race we're going to form government. Our goal is always to get as many Greens elected as possible, knowing that under the voting system we have, which of course Justin Trudeau promised would end in 2015, first past the post rewards those parties that rely on regional splits, right? So the Bloc Québécois will always do well under first past the post. The Reform Party got its West wants in and was formed. We're a national party with elected members of parliament in very different parts of Canada. And I'm not the least bit dismayed by how we're doing. We've had some strong headwinds and unfair blows, but we are not discouraged. Paul Manley is doing extremely well in Nanaimo Ladysmith, Mike Morris in Kitchener Centre, Anne-Marie Zadlik in Guelph, me in Saanich Gulf Islands, and a number of other ridings and specific candidates I could mention, where I think after Election Day, media are going to say, oh, how did we miss that? The Greens are going to elect more MPs than they have before, and did in fact do so at a time when other parties, the Bloc is having trouble against expectations, the NDP are certainly in trouble against expectations. Pierre Poilievre, who everybody was confident that he was going to be a majority prime minister, and I never thought so, but that's for other reasons. I thought that it was too early and he peaked too soon, and I also knew that as soon as Justin Trudeau stepped aside, which I thought he would before the election, everything would shift. So the tectonic shifts that have affected other bigger parties much more than they've affected us, really have left us to focus on our messages, our strong platform. Jonathan Pedneault in Outremont has been doing an extremely great job. I wish Canadians could have heard Greens in the debates and not heard other party leaders with answers that failed to make key points about the issues that are missing in this campaign around climate and Indigenous rights. Mm-hmm.
Listen, I will ask about the debates in a second, but I want to get back to the basic of it, though. So, why should Canadians be voting Green right now? Because if a Canadian voter is, for example, a small C Conservative, well, the big C Conservative Party needs their vote right now. If you are a progressive, pollsters tell us they are worried about a Pierre Poilievre government and therefore coalescing under the Liberals. Under that type of analysis, why vote Green?
Look, it looks like Mark Carney's making his way to yet another false majority government, where he'll have the majority of the seats, which means 100% of the power, with probably less than 50% of the vote. That's how first past the post works. Green voices are needed more than ever in Parliament because we work across party lines. We're consistently respectful. We raise the quality of the discourse. We've never resorted to three-word slogans that rhyme that we yell at each other. We are thoughtful. We are evidence-based. Our platform is the strongest on how we confront the trade and tariff threats from Trump. Our platform, of course, is the strongest on climate action, but also on social justice, on fighting poverty, and meeting the needs of the disabled community in this country. We have a very strong, solid platform and great candidates across Canada. Those candidates, at least some of us, obviously we're not going to form government, but a parliament, it's a majority of any party without Green voices is a diminished parliament, and Canadians will lament. And we're going to elect Green MPs. If we weren't there, there would be a real lack of discourse, debate, ideas, innovations, and a level of democracy that this country needs. No one in Canada looking south of the border would like it if we were a two-party system like the U.S. Countries need, healthy democracies need more than one voice through a megaphone. And Greens elected to Parliament will be that voice, working for our constituents, not working for any backroom, top-down, whipped vote kind of approach that you get from the status quo parties.
You know, you mentioned the debate commission, and we only have a few minutes left. And before we're done, I do want to address that, because they did invite the Green Party to participate and then disinvited the Green Party to participate. What do you think needs to be done with this debate commission going forward? Because that's just one decision that has come under fire for over both French and English language debates.
Well, one problem we had, and a lot of Canadians don't really grasp why the Debates Commission did what it did. We certainly don't. But there's been a confusion around their own language. They said nominated candidates. We had 342 nominated candidates. If when Mark Carney dropped the writ, which was within the scope of dropping the writ March 23rd, we could have had the election April 28th, which we do, or May 5th. If the election had been for May 5th, we would have had many more candidates, because we faced a lot of obstacles, including direct threats of harassment of our volunteers to collect signatures. The Debates Commission blew it, frankly. And I look at it, and it's really a shock to realize that whereas this Leaders Debate Commission was established with the commissioner being David Johnston, our former Governor General, when he stepped aside more than 2 years ago, nobody was put in place there. There was a vacancy, and there remains a vacancy for who is the commissioner. And what I hadn't realized was how dangerous, slipshod, and incompetent that organization would become when all the decision-making went to its executive director on staff, and not an eminent personage who was appointed as the debates commissioner. So it will need urgent work after the election. Unfortunately, we are considering and pursuing legal action. More on that soon. But in the meantime, Canadians need to know that we need fair rules for debates. That's why the Leaders Debate Commission was established, and unfortunately, it failed in its primary mission of fairness and assisting good, strong, healthy elections and democracy. When the Bloc Québécois with 78 candidates, all in Quebec, is considered suitable for a national debate, when the Greens with over 200 candidates in each province, 10 provinces, the Northwest Territories and the Yukon. So, and we're not in the debates. A lot of Canadians
Although
are asking,
the Bloc, to be fair, the Bloc did meet two of the other three considerations.
Yeah, but the way the considerations were developed, I worked on those initially with David Johnston, and they skewed them very strangely. The reason there were 2 out of 3 was to try to accommodate an upcoming party that might not yet have a seat. The idea that these rules would be used to exclude a party with 2 sitting MPs since the 1960s, when debates went onto television for the leaders of Canadian parties in an election. This is the first time since the 1960s that a national party with elected members of parliament was kept out of the debates. So they made up new rules, they broke their own rules, and with massive confusion, for us to receive a note at 7:20 in the morning on the day of the debates when they told the media the night before, the lack of fairness is astonishing and will not end here. But unfortunately, and more unfortunately for voters in this election campaign, to not be able to see and watch my co-leader Jonathan Pedneault directly head-to-head debate the other party leaders is shocking, undemocratic, and it doesn't end here.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Ms. May. You and I will speak again undoubtedly, but for this evening, thank you for the time.
Thank you for giving me a chance to talk to Canadians again. I've missed you guys.
Good to see you, Elizabeth May. Take care.
Thank you.
Well, going into Election Day, the polls have been fairly consistent about where the parties have their bedrock support right now. The Liberals in Atlantic Canada and Ontario, the Conservatives in the Prairies. But could the Liberals make gains in Alberta? Janet Brown is a pollster and the woman behind Janet Brown Opinion Research. Janet, always good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Listen, the national trend line, I don't have to tell you, when you look at the polls, they're pointing to a Liberal win. They're even pointing to potential Liberal gains in Alberta. What do you make of that analysis?
Well, you know, there's not a lot up for grabs here in Alberta. I mean, we're really talking about 6 seats, 8 seats if you're, you know, really creative. And that's not a big deal, except for the fact that 6 or 8 seats could make the difference for the Liberals when it comes to minority majority. So we're used to being overlooked here in Alberta, but it's kind of interesting to feel like we have a few seats that are going to be in the mix of determining what the government looks like.
Okay, a few seats. So what seats are you actually looking at when you say that?
Well, here in Calgary, I'm looking at 4 seats. So up in the northeast part of the city, we have a brand new riding called Calgary-McKnight. But the MP, George Chahal, who represented Calgary Skyview, he shifted over into this new riding. And then the old riding of Calgary Skyview, you look at those 2 ridings, you look at past vote, you look at the fact that one of them has an incumbent, and it looks highly likely that both of those ridings are going to go Liberal. It'll be a surprise on election night if they don't. Now, closer to downtown Calgary, you've got riding north of the river and south of the river, Calgary Confederation, Calgary Centre. Calgary Centre has been Liberal before. We're looking to see if it'll go Liberal again. Confederation's not been Liberal before, but it can be a hotly contested race, and so we're looking at that one. That's Calgary. Up in Edmonton, again, I'd point to 4 ridings. Edmonton Griesbaugh, Edmonton Strathcona, that both currently have NDP MPs, and then Edmonton Centre, which has gone Liberal in the past, and Edmonton Southeast, where the mayor of Edmonton, Amarjeet Sohi, a former federal minister, is running again. So those are the 8 that I have on my dance card, and I'm going to be watching on election night.
Yeah, you know, let's dig in a little bit to Edmonton, Strathcona, Edmonton, Griesbach. You know, Blake Desjardins, Heather McPherson, are they in trouble, would you say, right now?
Well, both of them are very popular in their ridings, and they should be both cruising to easy re-election. The problem is when you look at the collapse of the NDP nationally, it's leaving some people in Edmonton wondering what the right move is. So, you know, when you vote, you have to think about which party you'd most like to see win. You also think about the party you'd least likely to see win. So, you know, voters in Griesbach who'd ordinarily just happily vote NDP, they're wondering if that's the right move to stop the Conservatives. So I think those 2 ridings could be interesting if progressives don't come to a consensus on whether to vote Liberal or NDP. If they don't come to that consensus, then I see vote splitting, and I see the Conservatives in a position to win either one of those ridings.
So a real race when you're talking about those 2 particular ridings in the Alberta capital region. You know, we did see Rachel Notley at a campaign event with Jagmeet Singh just the other day. What's the power of that type of endorsement, do you think?
Well, again, I think it's in those 2 ridings, you know, like we've seen the collapse of the NDP vote across the country. People are saying, like, if you want to stop the Conservatives, you must vote Liberal. And there's just a handful of ridings where that may not be the case, where the NDP might have a better chance of winning. And so I think Rachel Notley coming out and supporting those NDP candidates and supporting Jagmeet Singh, she's saying here in those 2 ridings in Edmonton, if you want to stop the Conservatives, you need to vote NDP. And there's a mixed message there. We have other NDP stalwarts like Shannon Phillips, who lives in Lethbridge. She's actually endorsing the Liberal candidate down in Lethbridge. So I think Rachel Notley felt she had to come out there and really strongly say, in these 2 ridings, the correct vote is NDP, because progressive voters may be confused about the best place to put their vote to stop the Conservatives.
Mm-hmm. You know, we also saw Mark Carney, of course, have his campaign stops in Alberta earlier on. He did grow up in Edmonton. I'm wondering what the power of that message is, if at all, amongst Albertans, because, you know, when you look at, you know, how Canadians feel about the leaders, Poilievre's numbers are strongest in Alberta and Saskatchewan versus Mark Carney.
Right. Well, you know, Mark Carney was born in the Northwest Territories, but raised in Edmonton, went to high school in Edmonton. But Poilievre has deep Calgary roots as well. He grew up here. He went to university here. So kind of the Alberta roots of these 2 leaders is almost just a complete wash. What's really more important is the political stance of those leaders. So, of course, this is the heartland of conservatism. So just Albertans are just naturally more likely to be attracted to a conservative party. And now more than ever, I think I think you'll see that the Conservatives are very popular here in Alberta, and that this sort of Trudeau versus Carney debate, not as important here, because I think there's more voters who are just going to vote Conservative regardless of who is running the Liberal Party.
Janet, I always appreciate the time speaking with you. I appreciate the insight. Thank you for this.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that is Primetime Politics for this Wednesday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening with Andrew Thompson. I'll be on assignment, but I'll see you again on Friday. Take care.